Hi, I'm Jerry Argway. You're watching Protagonistas del Comic.
Buenas tardes, gente.
Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. La verdad que es una tarde espectacular. Acá estamos muy emocionados con esta oportunidad que tenemos hoy de hablar con una leyenda del cómic. Así que, sin muchos rodeos, saludamos a la gente del chat. Muchas gracias por estar apoyándonos acá con protagonistas del cómic. Y en esta emisión número 27, antes que nada, porque me estaba olvidando, ¿cómo estás, Mario? ¿Bien?
Bien, de 10. Muy contento y vamos a darle con todo.
Buenísimo. Así que vamos a empezar a hablar en inglés, porque nuestro protagonista del cómic habla en inglés. Así que I'm going to introduce the one and only Mr. Mike Barron.
Good morning. I guess
Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
You are. Doing good.
A total honor. It's a total honor, sir.
Yes, sir. You're a legend here in our country, and we are going to talk about this later in the interview.
Fire away, boys.
Perfect. To begin with the interview, tell us about your beginnings in the comic book industry. How you began in this industry?
Well, I broke into comics in 1981 with my partner, Steve Rude. I was working at an insurance company. One day I got a phone call from a newspaper editor I knew. And he said, there's some guy down here trying to sell us his art, and I think you should take a look at it. So he gave me the dude's phone number. I called him up, and we arranged to meet at the University of Wisconsin on the steps of the Student Union. And there he was, and he opened his portfolio, and I looked at it. And I thought, holy shit, this guy is really talented. And I said, well, what do you want to do? He says, well, I want to do comics, but I can't write. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do comics, but I can't draw. And it so happened we were very lucky. We were in the right place at the right time in the Capital City Distribution, the world's second largest comic book distributor at the time, a huge company, multi-million dollars with warehouses in many countries, wanted to publish their own line of comics. So I went home and I brainstormed Nexus. There were a lot of elements that went into it. I knew they wanted a superhero. And I thought, well, what would make this story compelling? And I thought, well, what if somebody died every time he showed up? That would be compelling because life and death is the stuff of drama. And drama is the stuff of entertainment. But I didn't want him to portray him as a cold-blooded killer. So I worked out this rationale that he was a reluctant executioner of mass murderers. And I drew the first 12 pages out by hand. That's how I used to write comics and wrote them that way for 20 years by drawing each page out by hand. And editors and artists loved it. My art isn't professional by any means, but it's good enough so that you can see what's going on. And they could see at a glance what each page was intended to do. And each page contained very nearly the final dialogue and the captions, plus whatever directions I felt I needed to do. And I gave those 12 pages to Steve Rude. He took them home, he penciled them, inked them, and lettered them. And we showed them to the boys at Capitol, and right away they said, yeah, this is good, we're going to go with this.
Wow.
Now we need 20 more pages. So I went home and I wrote 20 more pages, and I delivered them to the dude, and he penciled and inked and lettered them. And in those days, the first 3 issues were black and white.
Yeah.
And they were oversized. They're not the size comics are today. They were more the size of a standard magazine back in the day. And they did the first 3 issues, and then they decided that they wanted to try color. So they published 6 issues of Nexus in color and 4 issues of Badger in color before they realized they really didn't know what they were doing, despite being news comic book distributors. And they wanted to sell the characters off. And we were young and stupid because we signed our rights away. And the only reason we own the rights to Nexus today is because Mike Richardson, the publisher of Dark Horse, returned them to us in an unprecedented act of generosity. I don't know if it's ever occurred before or since. Badger is still owned by First Comics, and although it's in play and we are planning more Badger material, I don't own that character. It was a harsh lesson, but I have no complaints, because once Nexus and Badger started to appear in comic book stores, Marvel and DC called me and said, we would like you to write this and that. Marvel called and said, we'd like you to write the Badger. It was Carl Potts who called me, and he says, we want to do this because I've been reading your Badger comic. No, excuse me. He said, we want you to write the Punisher because I like the Badger. I think that what I see in the Badger makes me think you could write the Punisher. And I said, you bet. And so I wrote the Punisher for 5 years. I'm very proud of my Punisher line. And for DC, I wrote The Flash, Dead Man, Hawk and Dove, and many other titles. And so I was off and running. So for about 20 years, I had a great career in comics. And then I fell out of the end of the comic industry through nobody's fault but my own. I didn't understand how to manage a career. I do that better now, and much to my surprise. I find that these days I'm busier than I've ever been in my life. But there was a period there for about 10 years when I couldn't get any work, and I took any job I could, including janitor, unloading automobile mufflers, packing computer parts. And because of that period, I hardly wrote at all. And I had originally set out to write novels when I was a young man. I mean, in my 20s, I sat down and I said, well, I think I'll write a novel. So I just started writing. But I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand story. So I wrote a lot of drivel. And it led me to one of my theories, which is that every would-be writer has a million words of bullshit clogging up his system. And you have to get that out before you get to the good stuff. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. There are young novelists who burst upon the scene with their first novel. I'm thinking of Carson McCullers, who wrote The Heart is Lonely Hunter. She wrote that when she was 24 years old. And Richard Price, one of my favorite screenwriters and a great novelist, wrote The Wanderers when he was in his 20s and enjoyed huge success. But for most novelists, it's a long, hard slog till you get there. And it wasn't until I had moved from my home state of Wisconsin to Colorado, where I live now, that I decided one day that I wasn't going to give it up. And I had a good idea for a novel. So I started writing it. And when I was about a third of the way through it, I thought to myself, I know what I'm doing. I understand it. I see the story. And that had never occurred to me before. But of course, this was 30 years after I had first started to write a novel. And it just took a long time to gestate for me to see. Some people are quick learners. I'm not a quick learner. I'm a slow learner. But when I get it, I get it. And that novel was Banshees, which is available on Amazon. It's a horror story about a satanic rock band that comes back from the dead. It's my biggest novel. And I'm working on 3 novels right now. Any serious novelist who wants to make a living at it has to produce at least 3 novels a year. And you think, well, that's a lot. If you've never written a novel, 3 novels, holy shit, how could I possibly do that? Well, if you are a professional novelist, you do it. I have friends who publish 6 novels a year. I have one friend who writes well over 500,000 words a year, probably a lot more than that. His name is Kevin J. Anderson. He writes the Dune novels. He's a
Yeah.
science fiction writer. He's also one of my publishers. He's the publisher of Banshees and 2 other horror novels I've written, Scorpio and Domain. And both those novels, if you like horror, I guarantee you won't be able to put them down. But I was back working on comics, and this was back in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was doing great. I was hauling down big bucks. I designed and built my own house and paid it off completely. And then I fell on hard times. And the reason I moved is I was married to a woman then who had some physical problems. And she said, well, we're going to have to move or I'm going to die. And so we looked. Why did she say that? It was because the Wisconsin winters are very severe, very severe.
Yeah.
So we moved to Colorado, and many people think, well, why would you trade Wisconsin for Colorado? Aren't the winters in Colorado just as bad? No, they're not. They're very mild compared to the upper Midwest.
Right.
And it was here where I couldn't get work that I was taking all those odd jobs, although I did work as a janitor for a while in Madison, Wisconsin. But then slowly, bit by bit, I began to work my way back into writing. And none of it was for the big 2, Marvel or DC. They won't give me the time of day. They have a blacklist of writers whom they will never hire. Chuck Dixon is one of them. There are many others. And the reason is that because we're conservatives. And the comic book companies have been taken over by people with a different vision. That's fine. I don't care about that because I would much rather work on my own creations. And recently, we have gone into self-publishing. And you've heard of Indiegogo and Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And we're having some success there. And I have a raft of projects scheduled throughout this year and into next year as well. That are being worked on by some brilliant artists. I don't know if you're familiar with Pat Broderick. Pat Broderick is one of the greatest comic book artists of our day. He illustrated Micronauts and Firestorm and many other famous titles. Well, Pat and I are working on a Western, and Pat has already penciled and inked 30 pages. I said, Pat, what do you want to write? What do you want to draw? He says, I want to do a Western. So we are doing a Western. And that's the next project, which we hope to launch by the end of May, certainly no later than June. It's called Bronze Star. And it's a supernatural Western.
Whoa.
Normally,
I have
Very
no problem.
interesting.
Yeah, I have no problem with a straight Western, but I had a story I wanted to tell, and I had an irresistible premise that I don't want to give away here, but we have been posting art periodically on Facebook and Twitter, and it's the best work of Pat's career. Everybody who's seen it has just been blown away, and we're all very excited about it. And that's the next project we're going to crowdfund. The last one we crowdfunded was Thin Blue Line, a graphic novel about 2 police officers trying to survive the night in a riot-torn city. And this was inspired by the events of the summer of 2020 when city after city went up in flames, dozens of people murdered, millions and millions of dollars damaged, small businesses belonging to people who could least afford to lose them were destroyed by rampaging mobs in the name of social justice. And in every one of these cases, there was a reporter standing out in front of a city going up in flames, explaining, these are mostly peaceful protests. And then politicians, not cranks, well, I shouldn't say that, they obviously are cranks, but people in a position of authority who are trusted with public service started to call for defunding the police. And my reaction was one of incredulity. because you're either for the rule of law or you're not, and civilization depends on the rule of law. And I'm not going to get down into the high weeds of bad cops and good cops. We all know.
Yeah, right.
There are
Yeah.
bad cops, and I'd be happy to point them out to you, but this wasn't about that. This was about two good cops who joined the police force to serve their communities. And one of the reasons I wrote is because I know a number of police officers, and the ones that I know are civic-minded individuals who joined the police force to be a force for good. Which brings us to my second rule of writing, which is show, don't tell. And that is a rule that applies to life as well. And by that I mean, if you want to do good works, but don't advertise them.
Yeah.
Don't go on Twitter or Facebook and pose with your Ukraine frame or I got a vaccine today frame, which is what we call virtue signaling, and it's empty. We say deeds, not words. When I say you should do that in real life, I mean, if you want to do good works, but don't advertise them.
Yeah.
People appreciate them, they will come to light. And we all know that there are a number of people, famous people, who do good works. Famous athletes and actors who give to children's hospitals, who visit burn children's in burn wards, who hear about people having trouble and give them gifts of money or help. And when we hear about them, these are the good people. It's not from themselves or their PR department. It's from somebody who observed and felt obligated to report that, hey, look at this guy. He's actually walking the walk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the artist for Thin Blue Line is an old friend of mine. I've known him for many years. He's also a full-time police officer. And we're very proud of the book. I don't know if you've seen the art. You can still order the book. It's at the printer now. Anybody who wants to look at the art, go to thinbluelinecomics.com. thinbluelinecomics.com and take a look.
Mm-hmm.
The artist is Joseph Arnold. He's the penciler. The inker is Jeff Slemons. Jeff Slemons is a brilliant artist in his own right. And if you go to jeffslemons.com, you could spend all day looking through his art. He does everything. He does cartoony stuff. He does monsters. He does dinosaurs. He does landscapes. It's brilliant. And he's just a regular guy. Both these guys are local. We get together from time to time. I saw them both a couple of weeks ago. We were at a local comic convention.
Sir, I want to ask you a question. You said before about a blacklist of writers right now.
Yes.
By the agenda, with they follow an agenda right now. Do you think?
Yes.
Do you think some characters will be in a blacklist to act, or how can I say, they act in another way, like Punisher? More soft things to do with the characters?
Well, Punisher, Marvel doesn't know what to do with the Punisher, obviously, because
that's right.
You're
That's
aware
the
of this
question, right?
because they recently changed his symbol
Yeah.
to this crazy snaky thing, and now he's the leader of the Hand or some ninja group or some stuff like that, and it's because they're upset that police and military sometimes use the Punisher symbol. And anybody who doubts this need only watch the movie American Sniper.
Yeah.
Chris Kyle, who used the Punisher symbol. Now, of course, it's easier for the military to appropriate it because they're at war. And the object of war is to kill people and destroy things. Now, I can understand why people get upset when police officers adapt the symbol. Because it's not appropriate, it's not professional. On the other hand, they don't adapt the symbol to say we're going to kill anybody we don't like. They do it because they're drawn to the Punisher stance as a protector of the innocent. And that's why the police adapt that symbol. Now, it so happens that Jerry Conway and I are both going to be at the same comic convention in August. And I have suggested that we have a panel to discuss the meaning of the Punisher and what his proper direction should be. Because Jerry has been quite vocal in condemning police and military who use the Punisher symbol. He doesn't want them to use it. And in many ways, he sounds ashamed that he created the Punisher in the first place. Now, I understand that Jerry has been living in Hollywood for the last couple of decades, working in the television field. And Hollywood is a company town. And you either toe the line or you don't get work. And the line changes every day. But it's all about the virtue signal. And I'm sure you're aware of this, how actor after actor comes out with a loud declaration of their beliefs and condemnation of people they don't like. It goes on all the time, and we see it all the time. Gone are the days of the reticent movie star, people like Clark Gable and Bette Davis, Jimmy Stewart, who volunteered during World War II, and others who, like Bette Davis and many other stars who weren't eligible for military service, created a canteen in Hollywood called the Hollywood Canteen. And canteen is a nightclub. And service members were served free. They could go there and order drinks and see the lovely ladies and dance. And often these actresses served as waitresses there. I know that Bette Davis did, and many others did. That was part of their war effort to help the troops. Well, today, you can't imagine anything like that. But of course, history's not so clear-cut today as who's the bad guys and the good guys are. And World War II was very clear-cut.
Yes.
But today there are a number of actors who have served. I'm thinking of Driver. What is his name? He's in House of Gucci. Adam Driver.
Adam Driver.
Yes, he's also in the Star Wars movies, the recent ones, and he's a very good actor. And he's a military veteran. And of course, Clint Eastwood is a military veteran, but Clint comes from an older. Pardon?
Gene Hackman too.
Gene Hackman, and of course, Clint is from an earlier era, and we are blessed to have him still with us. He's a unique case in that. As a director, he keeps getting better and better. I have to say, though, that the last one, Cry Macho, was not very good. But the movie Gran Torino is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And so is $1 Million Baby. And those are two masterpieces that he directed when he was in his 70s and 80s. And now I think Clint is 90. And I think he has another movie in the works, which is very surprising, but you can bet I'll see it.
And The Mule, did you like it? The Mule? That's a hard story, too. I
liked The Mule. I don't think it was as good as $1 Million Baby or Gran Torino, but it was enjoyable. I thought it was pretty good.
It's talking about sorry.
Speaking about the Punisher and that you got contacted from the contact from Marvel Comics because of the Badger. How did you create the Badger? How did you come up with the Badger?
All right, boys, this is quite a story. All right, so I had Nexus going, and I wanted to get another title going with them. And I had seen Jeffrey Butler's artwork on a poster downtown in Madison. So I contacted him. I said, Jeff, you want to do comics? He said, yeah. And I said, well, Jeff, what do you want to draw? He says, I want to draw druids. I said, all right. So I wrote this 10-page story about a cantankerous druid wizard in 6th century Wales who was so obnoxious that his fellow druids took up a collection and hired some Vikings to put him in a coma and sail west and drop him off the edge of the earth. Now, as we all know, they didn't come to the edge of the earth. They came to the new land. They carried him inland as far as they could get, which was Wisconsin, and they buried him there. And Jeff drew it. It was beautiful. 10 pages, just beautiful. So we went back up to the Capitol offices, and I said, "Boys, here's our next comic." And they looked at it, and I'll never forget my old friend Milt, who was the publisher. I'm still friends with him today. Look at it, he says, "Yeah, nobody wants to read about druids. Give us a costume superhero." And my first reaction is, why would anybody put on a costume and fight crime? They'd have to be crazy. Boing. And I had been reading a book about multiple personalities, the minds of Billy Milligan at the time, and that was a huge influence on me. So I thought, well, what about a multiple personality superhero? And this was 1982, by the way.
Yeah.
So I went back to Jeff and I said, "Jeff, they don't want druids. They want a costume crime fighter." He says, "Well, I'm not going to waste these pages." So I said, "Fine. We'll use the first 10 pages, and then I'll introduce Badger, and we'll incorporate Ham into the story." And that's how Badger met Ham, the weather wizard.
Talking about this universe that you created back on the Punisher, those stories are the most valuable for me. I'm talking to me, you're talking for me, for myself, because there is the essence of the character, and
Well,
you can understand what you did with the character, and the character himself explained that he's more than a vigilante. He's a kind of hero, and what he did with his methods, I think.
I approached the title as a pure crime story. And for 3 years, there were no robots, science fiction, supervillains, or horror. It was the Punisher versus gangs, drug smuggling gangs, big finance, crooked bankers. We did bring the Kingpin in because the Kingpin can be very credible in a realistic story about crime, and that worked out well. And likewise, we did a crossover with Daredevil. This was not my idea, but I embraced it because Daredevil was another street-level crime fighter who wasn't jetting off into space or shooting webs from his hands. Of course, if you think about it rationally, a blind man couldn't do all that stuff, but the blind warrior has been a staple in fiction for as long as there's been fiction. I think of Zatoichi, the blind swordsman. There are many movies about Zatoichi from Japan that are just brilliant. And Rutger Hauer in Blind Justice.
Yeah, I love it. I love that movie.
We love that movie, sir.
Zatoichi, yes. If you can suspend your disbelief that a blind man can feel his way through the world with his hearing alone, then you can accept these stories. And I have to say, one brilliant thing Frank Miller did, he was writing Daredevil for a while. And I'll never forget this scene where Daredevil was looking for a kidnapped woman, and he's just crouching on a skyscraper in Manhattan. He's just listening. He's just listening. And his hearing is so great that he hears her cry from miles away, differentiates it from all the background noise, and then he's on the move.
Amazing. Really amazing.
We can hear you. We can hear you for hours, sir. It's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. Speaking about the Punisher, yeah, you were the one that created Microchip,
yes.
partner.
Yeah.
And how did you come up with the idea of a partner for the Punisher? Because he was a lone hero.
I thought about it rationally, and I realized the Punisher can't do everything alone. He's got to have some technical support. He's a former military guy. He understands what technical support is. And so I created Microchip to be his technical support, just not just as an armorer, but as an intelligence officer as well, because being a computer expert, Microchip could use the internet, and I think it was just being born at that time, to gather intelligence, and that's how Microchip came into the series. By the way, I feel I have to mention that many longtime readers and even new fans are not happy with the direction Marvel has taken in recent years, particularly in regards to Captain America and the Punisher, who seem to be wandering and cut off from their roots and have no real meaning for the modern reader. And we are developing a character called Private American that will address that. Private American is everything Captain America should be, but isn't. We will launch this campaign sometime this summer. It's being drawn and inked right now by Richard Bonk. It's brilliant stuff. It's going to make your head explode. We're very excited about it.
Cool stuff.
Wow.
Sir. Cool stuff. Continuing with the Punisher, Mario, there was a lot of movies about the Punisher.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies. I recall I recently I watched again The Punisher from 1989. Then the 2004 and 2008, I think, is the Warzone, and the TV series. What do you think was the best incarnation of the character?
Well, of the four movies, I've only seen three. I've never seen the Dolph Lundgren version. I suppose I should correct that one of these days. But the three movies, do I have to, or is there only three? I mean, I've seen the Thomas Jane version and the Ray Stevenson version. I have to say that in terms of embodying the character, Ray Stevenson absolutely nailed it. But the movie Punisher War Journal is just a mess. It doesn't take itself seriously. And if a movie doesn't take itself seriously, the audience can't take it seriously. As for the Thomas Jane version, it just missed the target by a mile. There were so many missed opportunities. For some reason, they moved it to Miami. I don't understand that at all. The Punisher is a very easy character to get right. And if you want to see him done right, I recommend the movie The Equalizer starring Denzel Washington.
Yes, sir.
It's everything the Punisher should be, but isn't. Now, as to the TV series, I've watched 4 or 5 of the episodes. And I think that actor, what's his name?
John Bernthal.
John Bernthal. I think he's very good. But the writing to me was confusing and irritating, particularly when he first kidnaps Microchip and tortures him. That's not what I would have done, but that's fine. And I'll probably watch some more of it. And I think John Bernthal is a very good actor. And I read the other day that he was 5 feet 11. And I was happy to read that because to me, he always seemed like a midget in those shows. I don't know why he sits so short, but he's not short at all. He's 5 feet 11. So that's fine. I think he makes a very good Punisher.
I think that the best version of Microchip is Wayne Knight in the Ray Stevenson version.
I agree with you. Absolutely. That's exactly
I think it's the best choice.
Yeah.
And changing to Dark Horse, when you work on Star Wars, that was a great chance. That you also mentioned Kevin J. Anderson. That was my introduction to the expanded universe from Star Wars with their novels of the Jedi Academy trilogy, and you got the chance to write the adaptation of the Timothy Zahn trilogy, the Tron trilogy that it's called now.
I love it.
And it's called Legends now. What can we do? It's a sad thing to say this, but it's called Legends. And how do you prepare for this? Or were you a Star Wars fan?
Oh,
Have you
yes.
read
Yeah,
the
I saw
novels?
the movies when they came out, the original three. And then of course, I read the novels, and they said they wanted to turn each novel into 6 issues. So very simply, I looked at the page count. If it was 400 pages, I divide 6 into that and see how many pages if you divide each novel up into 6 different sections. And this wasn't hard and fast, because you have to go where the natural breaks are, where one chapter ends and another begins. You don't want to split a chapter up in the middle. So I did that. And then I drew each page out by hand, as I had been doing with all my comics, and put in all the descriptions and captions and dialogue that it needed. And I didn't use any of my own dialogue. I didn't make anything up. Every word in there, all the dialogue, was Timothy Zahn's dialogue. And of course, they were a pleasure to adapt, because he writes so vividly. It lends itself to a visual interpretation.
Yes, here in Argentina, we love these stories, especially here of the Empire. I think if you say to an Argentinian comic book fan about Star Wars comics, they say that one of the first said is Heir to Empire, right, Kyle?
Yeah, of course. And as I always thought, these comics, these
Sequels.
stories should have been the follow-up to the original trilogy, and it never happened. We got what we got from Disney. And what do you think of the sequel trilogy of Star Wars?
Yes.
That's all.
I had to mute myself because my wife is coming home, and when she opens the garage door, the whole house shakes.
Oh,
What do I think of the original trilogy? Is that the question? Well, I think
Yeah.
they're brilliant movies.
No,
They're
no,
all-
the prequel, the new movies,
Oh,
the new sequel.
the Disney movies.
I've only seen a couple of them, but I wasn't that impressed. They just didn't have that grab you by the throat appeal that the early ones did. And I think the reason for that is all those early movies were the vision of one man, and not just George Lucas, who directed the very first one, but the directors he chose for the subsequent 2. They were real directors, and they were in charge. Whereas all these recent Star Wars movies strike me as committee concoctions, that they were put together by committees. They say, well, let's add a little spice here and a little sugar here, and hey, can we bring in a four-legged reptile or whatever? That it didn't rise organically out of the Star Wars source material.
Yeah, and writing the adaptation. Have you met Timothy Zahn?
I did
You
meet
got
Timothy.
together and speak about the creative process.
Well, we didn't really talk much. We were both at the same convention. I went over, introduced myself, and Tim was very gracious. I told him I liked his books, and he even gave me a blurb for something I was writing, but I forget what that was. It was like 12 years ago. And since then, of course, I've had nothing to do with Star Wars, except occasionally getting sucked into seeing one of the movies or another. And they're forgettable. I can't even tell you what happened, in those movies. I can't even name the movies that I saw. There were a couple of new ones. One in which Mark Hamill appeared as an old man at the end.
Yeah, Force Awakens.
Yeah.
The worst one. No, the better one of the three. Of the three prequels, I think it's the better one.
I think the best one is Rogue One. Did you see that, sir?
Rogue
One.
I don't know. Is that the one where the
Oh.
girl is a rebel and she escapes from her family and she's taking?
one.
Yeah,
I started to watch it. I just couldn't get through it. Just felt like a rehash to me. That's one of the problems that a lot of us movie fans here in America have, is that Hollywood has run out of original ideas, and everything is a reboot or a new version. They're remaking everything under the sun. I understand. Well, there's been a remake of Enter the Dragon has been in the works for years, and of course the Ghostbusters remakes. And it's hard to capture that original magic. There are very few sequels that stand up to the original. The only two that I can think of are The Godfather Part 2 and Aliens.
Oh, of
Yeah,
course.
two
Totally. Totally.
big hitters. Big hit. They are awesome. Mario?
Well, sir, what if you have to write a story about now here today about the Punisher, which villain do you want to confront with?
I would not write the Punisher. I'm writing Private American. And Private American, when we meet him, is on the southern border, intercepting snakeheads, drug smugglers, people smugglers, and terrorists trying to creep into the country. Because that's what he would be doing today if he were being written with an ounce of common sense.
Wow.
I'm gonna finish this.
I want to read that. I want to read that
interview, and I'm gonna go looking forward to it.
I just want to say that no organism can survive, neither a single cell nor a nation, if it doesn't control its borders. This is axiomatic and should be obvious to any intelligent person, which makes what's happening up here so disturbing.
Sir, returning to the badger, just one little question I want to ask you is that this character, as you say, is a complex character because he has a multiple personality disorder, and now it's like something that it's on vogue because of Moon Knight that began airing a couple of weeks ago. Did you have any repercussions when you decided to make the badger a person with this illness?
Well, I have not seen the new Moon Knight. It's on a streaming service I don't get. And people have told me over the years that variously Moon Knight was ripping off Badger, Deadpool was ripping off Badger, Lobo was ripping off Badger, and to which I say it's possible, but it doesn't bother me because you can't copyright an idea. And people frequently come up with the same idea that don't know each other. It's just coincidence. It happens all the time. There's one year that Hollywood put out 2 Christopher Columbus movies, and each studio said, "What? This other studio is doing a Christopher Columbus movie? How can that happen?" And the other studio is saying exactly the same thing. And yet it did happen, and they both put out their Christopher Columbus movies. And another year, there were 2 volcano movies, and the same thing. So what?
Or Wyatt Earp.
Yeah. But fortunately, the choice between Wyatt Earps is very easy. Tombstone is great. Wyatt Earp with
Kevin Costner.
Thank you. He's not so great. Probably because it's way too long. And also, I didn't think Kevin Costner was a convincing Wyatt Earp, but I have to say I love Kevin Costner. He's made a recent movie called Let Him Go, which I recommend. It's one of the best dramas I've ever seen. It's absolutely gripping.
Mm-hmm. And after you got the chance to write The Punisher, after that you got called from DC, or how do you get in contact with DC to write the other titles?
Well, Mike Gold was my editor at First Comics, and Mike is an old hippie from Chicago. And he did such an outstanding job as editor at first that DC hired him. And when Mike went to DC, he asked me to write The Flash. But see, I also worked with some other editors there. Denny O'Neil was my editor on some subjects, and there were other editors, but I can't remember them. I knew Julie Schwartz, but I don't think he was editing anything at the time.
Which was the better? I don't know the better. It would say the better, but the most the editor that you were most comfortable work with.
Both Marvel and DC treated me great. I have no complaints with either one of them. Now they've changed drastically. There's nobody I know that's left there except for a couple of people that are on the verge of dropping out of the system altogether. But I haven't been to their offices in decades. I have no idea what's going on, and they have no idea what they're doing.
Okay, sir. You spoke about the Flash, that it's here in Argentina. The Flash is so important, and especially your run, because in the late 80s, it began here in Argentina. It began
Start publishing.
an editorial called Perfil began publishing DC Comics, and The Flash from Mike Baron and Jackson Guys was one of the series that began publishing, and it ran through 49 issues here in Argentina. But
I only wrote the first 13.
Exactly. And here your run was fully published. And
Yes.
It was so loved for the fans, so loved. But here I would like to you to tell me what was like to write the Flash. What drives you write the Flash, and your ideas, because you put a lot of ideas, and you had to work with the new Flash, not the Silver Age Flash. This was a Titan. It was Wally West, and he becomes the Flash in Crisis on Infinite Earth.
Well, I had a couple of intuitions. The first one was that the Flash burned off so much energy racing around the Earth at faster than sound speeds. I have spared you that sneeze. That he had to take in an enormous amount of calories so as not to collapse from exhaustion. And that's what became why he was eating so much. You know, he could eat all day and never put on an ounce because he would burn it off. My second insight was he was a young man on the make, and that he had a lot to learn. And because of that, he wasn't perfect. He had a number of flaws. He treated women rather casually, and he demanded money for his services. And I think that changed as the series went on, because the individual grows. In the best fiction, an individual changes over the course of the fiction and becomes a better person for the most part. Unless you're who wrote No Country for Old Men?
Ethan Cohen, Joel Cohen.
No, they did the movie that the author. What's his name?
Pardon?
No. The author.
The author of the book.
Just a minute.
Oh, it's all this stuff. McCarthy.
Cormac McCarthy.
Cormac McCarthy. Yeah, I saying you want your hero to be heroic, unless you're Cormac McCarthy. I don't know if you've read any other Cormac McCarthy books, but to call them bleak is an understatement. And his one book, Blood Meridian, there's not a likable character in it. Often his characters are loathsome. The least loathsome among them becomes the hero. No Country for Old Men does have a hero in the person of the sheriff, the old sheriff, played by Tommy Lee Jones, who keeps remarking that the world is changing and that he can no longer deal with it the way it is.
Yeah.
Now, here in this part of the final part of the interview, we have a surprise for you. And Mario, if you want to
Okay,
tell
let me
the
do
story.
the honors. I'll do the honors. Sir, here you said what Kyle said that your run is very famous and is very touching to us, to our generation. We have here in that time a gossip magazine called Flash. A gossip magazine here talking about interviews about very famous artists. So they can't use the title of The Flash on the magazine, on the comic book. So here in Argentina, they change the name of the title, and the title was called Flashman. And this is the real proof. We have proof here that the Flashman title was that.
That's quite a prize.
It's amazing.
And it was called Flashman, the
Flushman.
49.
You should be a plumber.
Exactly. The quickest plumber in
That's
the
right.
DC universe.
By the way, Jackson Geis and I are working together again for the first time in decades. He's illustrating a story for giant-sized, two-fisted manly tales, which Graham Nolan is publishing. And Graham, of course, is a famous artist, famous for Batman. And like a number of us, Graham is now pursuing his career outside normal channels via crowdfunding with Indiegogo and Kickstarter projects. And thus far, giant-sized, two-fisted manly tales, which is on Indiegogo, is well over $100,000. And it's a 100-page book. And if he reaches 150, it's going to be a hardbound.
Awesome. Mr. Baron, do you have any other projects you want to tell here to people to let them know if they can support the Kickstarter besides the ones you mentioned?
Yeah, let me run down a couple. Dark Horse is publishing 2 new Nexus graphic novels by me that won't be out until 23. The first one is illustrated by Richard Bonk. The second will be illustrated by Kelsey Shannon. Kelsey is in the middle of illustrating my 3-issue Nexus miniseries triplets. The first one has been published. It was a crowdfunder, so it's only available unless you got in on the crowdfunder. I have a limited number of copies myself, which I am happy to part with. If you want to get in touch with me on social media, I'm on Twitter. It's at Bloody Red Baron on Twitter. I have a website, bloodyredbaron.com. I'm on Facebook as Michael A. Baron, and also the comics and novels of Mike Baron. And I have a Substack column, substack.com. Just go to Substack and look up Mike Baron. And I write about writing there a great deal. I write about all sorts of things. And that's a good way to keep track of what I'm up to. I'm involved in so many projects these days that I have to juggle them all. I told you about Bronze Star. It's written and Patrick is illustrating it. And Private American, it's written, and Richard Bonk is illustrating it. The third Nexus graphic novel that Kelsey Shannon will illustrate is written. I also am working on a project for an Austrian entrepreneur. It's called 2084. And from the title, you can guess that it's about everything that's happening right now, everything that Orwell predicted, with the addition of powerful telepaths and telekinetics, who are an unknown factor in this brave new world, which is trying to centralize all government, one world government. And I think that we've learned through practice for centuries that centralizing all decision makings invariably leads to disaster. But the people who fight their way into power don't care because they're not doing it to serve people, they're doing it to serve themselves. We see this one world government movement going on today. I say, no, thank you. Keep your decisions local because the people who live in the town know best how to deal with the town. And that's what it comes down to. What else am I working on? Man, a bunch of novels, you know. I just published my 9th biker novel, which is available on Amazon. If you want to go to Amazon and see what I've written, just type in Mike Barron, and you'll get page after page. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. The good stuff is new. You know, I'm proud of all my stuff here, but like all writers, I wish that there were some stories I could pull back, and none of these were written in within the past 20 years, but before that, I see how I could improve. And I think every writer looks at what he's written at some point and says, man, I could have done that better.
Yeah, of course. I think it's something that everyone does when you work on something. It's like, I could have done this better, but it's what you do. It's what you do in the moment, and it's your best. And especially speaking about your work, we really appreciate what you've done for the comic book industry, for the comics itself, for the characters like Wally West, like the Punisher, and especially I really love Star Wars, especially these comics. It's something that, besides reading the novels that I did, it's something that I I I keep and cherish this comic because they are awesomely written, and they are so true to the novel, that they are. If people, if you can buy this and read it, please do it.
Do it.
And
For
and also, sorry, Mario, just a second. And also, your Nexus run with Steve Rudd, it's awesome. Awesome. We speak about with Steve last time in the last episode, and we told him the same.
yes,
It's
it's amazing.
something that we love because of this sci-fi thing, and Alex Toth style, and uh, ghost space ghost style opera, space opera. It's amazing, and
Thank
we
you,
discovered
gentlemen.
it a couple of months ago when we decided to approach to you guys.
We are gratified.
Sir, thank you for all your work. And as I said to the other interviewer, you are the real hero. You can draw, you can write. The characters are still there, but the thing you write or you draw, it stays here in the heart, not in the mind, just in the heart. So, sir, thank you so much. You are the real hero here.
You are
You're
too
the
kind,
Punisher.
sir.
You are the Flash. You're everything.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
I'm out of here.
Well,
Go ahead.
please.
One more question.
No, we're gonna say goodbye, Mr. Barron.
All right.
Don't go away. Stay there, and we're gonna say goodbye in Spanish.
Yeah.
Gente, muchísimas gracias por estar acá. Nada, ese es Mr. Barron here. Es un honor tenerlo. Acuérdense que esto está hecho a puro pulmón, pura pasión por el cómic y por los autores del cómic, los creadores del cómic. Dejen su like, déjenlo,
Por
déjenlo,
favor.
no le cuesta nada. Apoyen este contenido porque es original. Así que muchas gracias, gente. Nos estamos viendo en el próximo protagonista del cómic el mes que viene y lean cómics y apoyen el cómic.
El
Gracias.
contenido, exacto. Nos vemos. Hasta la próxima.
Hasta la próxima.